Did you know that you can make screen printing projects 3D? In this screen printing tutorial, I'm going to show you how to take this screen printing ink that you already own and turn it into three-dimensional screen printing projects using Speedball's Puff Additive. My name is Alex Vanover, and I'm so glad that you guys are here. If you love screen printing using your Cricut, then you are going to love this project. I cannot wait to show you how to work with Puff Additive. I do want to thank Speedball for sponsoring today's video, but you guys already know that you never have to worry. All the opinions in this video are always my own. Okay, let's jump into this project.
As with any Cricut project, you guys know that the very first step is choosing your design. And if you've been around DIY Alex for a while, you know that I am obsessed with football, so I am celebrating the beginning of football season with a football SVG file. So I'm going to click on my recent uploads here in the bottom left-hand corner, and I'm going to insert this Classy Until Kickoff SVG file into my canvas. Once the design is on the canvas, then we need to size it according to our project. Now I'm going to be putting this design on a tote bag, and so the width of my project I want to be about 8 inches. So with the SVG file still selected, I'm going to go up to the edit bar and ensure that my SVG file is locked. So you can see that the lock is open, which means I can adjust the proportions disproportionately, but I want to resize it proportionally. So to do that, I'm going to click on the lock so that the proportions stay the same. And then once it's locked, I'll go ahead and bump my size down just a little bit to exactly 8 inches wide, which makes the height about 7.17 inches high, and that's totally fine. So another element to resizing this design or preparing it for our project is to ensure that everything cuts exactly where we want it to. So if you guys know a lot about Design Space, you know that because these files are grouped, they will not cut where they are currently when we get to the map preview. So instead, what we're going to do is ungroup all of the layers, click and hold our mouse down and draw a box around everything. And then in the bottom of the layers panel in the actions panel, I'm going to choose attach instead. So then once I have everything resized and attached correctly, I'm going to save my project and then click the green Make It button to proceed. Now with any screen printing project, I always find it best practice to do two things. I always like to mirror my design so that I can place my vinyl on the back side of my screen. And I like to move my design towards the center of the mat. So this is a fairly small design, so it may not need to take up an entire 12 by 12 sheet of vinyl, but I like to leave some margin all the way around the sides because that's a lot less painter's tape that I'm gonna have to use to cover up the rest of the screen printing screen. So once I have the design mirrored and placed towards the center of my mat, then I'll click the green Continue button. And once my Cricut Maker 3 connects, then I'll choose a cut setting. Now I'm going to be using my favorite permanent vinyl, which is StarCraft HD. And I have found that the best setting for StarCraft HD is just the regular vinyl setting. I have also found that the premium permanent vinyl setting works well with StarCraft HD as well, but I get a little bit more of an even cut with just the plain vinyl setting. So that's what I'm going to click on and then choose done. And now we're ready to hop over to my Cricut machine so we can cut the adhesive vinyl and prepare our screen for this project.
Then you'll place your adhesive vinyl on a green standard grip cutting mat and load it into your Cricut machine to cut. Then once our design is finished cutting, next we need to weed our adhesive vinyl. Remember when weeding your vinyl for purposes of screen printing that we're gonna be using our vinyl as a template. And what that means is that we are gonna need to remove the parts of the vinyl we would normally keep because those are the areas that we wanna allow ink to come through the vinyl as we swipe down our screen printing screen. It's important that we leave details like the centers of our letters in place so that when the screen printing ink passes through our vinyl, that all of the details translate correctly. Then once you're finished weeding your design, next you need to add it to some transfer tape. And friend to friend, let me give you some advice. When screen printing, you want to use the least tacky transfer tape that you can possibly find. Super sticky transfer tape is going to make it really difficult to release the vinyl onto the screen. So I like to use my clear medium tack transfer tape because it's the least sticky and it's my favorite transfer tape. Even though this transfer tape isn't super sticky, I'm still going to roll some out and stick it to the table before sticking my vinyl to it. That way I remove as much tack as possible. So I'll just flip it over and stick it down towards the table, and that will continue removing even more tack. Then I'm gonna flip it back over with the sticky side facing up, and I'm gonna place the vinyl on the transfer tape very slowly to make sure I have as few wrinkles in my vinyl and transfer tape as possible. Then once the transfer tape is on top, I'll use a squeegee to burnish or apply pressure to the vinyl and transfer tape to make sure that they stick well together. Now I'm ready to remove the backing from my vinyl and stick my vinyl to my screen. Because I'm using a smaller size design for this project, I'm going to be using my 10" by 14" Speedball screen. But I'm going to flip it over so that I can apply the vinyl and transfer tape to the back of my screen. That way the front side doesn't have any vinyl to interfere with the screen printing process. So I'm just going to flip it over with the sticky side facing down, and I'm going to place my design approximately in the middle of the screen. Then I'll lower it onto the screen slowly to make sure I have as few bubbles as possible. And then I'll burnish with my squeegee again on the back and the front side of the screen. Then once it's well burnished, now I can remove the transfer tape from over top of the vinyl to give me my screen printing stencil. Now, to protect the top and bottom of the screen from getting any stray ink through the screen onto my project, I'm going to use painter's tape to cover up the areas that the vinyl does not cover. Make sure that any painter's tape that you use overlaps well with the vinyl and with other layers of painter's tape so that you don't get any small lines in your projects. And once you have your painter's tape applied, your screen is ready for screen printing. Now we get to play with the screen printing puff additive. One of the things that I love most about the puff additive is being able to add it to any screen printing color you already own to get the 3D look. Now you do want to keep in mind that your puff additive will give your ink a matte and opaque type of look when you're finished using it. So if you have an ink that has a little bit of a metallic sheen to it, it's probably not going to show through when mixing it with the puff additive. Something else to keep in mind is once you mix puff additive with your ink, you can store your mixture in an airtight container, but you can store it indefinitely. So if you have some left over, you can still reuse it for a future project. The best way that I found to measure the puff additive is this. Open up your puff additive and give it a nice stir. And I like to measure it out this way. I like to use 1 tablespoon of puff additive to 3 tablespoons of screen printing ink. Now that's not going to give you a ton of projects. I would say depending on the size of your project, that will make just 1 to 3 projects. So of course you could scale this for larger projects if you wanted to. But keep in mind that the mixture does dry pretty quickly. So if you're doing a larger project, you may want to consider doing it in small batches so that you don't have to worry about the ink drying for too long on your screen. So in my cup, I'll place 1 tablespoon of the Puff Additive. And now I'm gonna go rinse off my tablespoon so that I can add 3 tablespoons of regular fabric screen printing ink. Then I'll give my ink a little bit of a shake and add 3 tablespoons of it to our mixture. There's 1. Here is tablespoon number 2. And tablespoon number 3. Then we'll close up our ink and mix these two together really, really well. I really like using a clear cup because then I can see how well my mixture is actually mixed together based on how much white and orange I can see is left. And yes, mixing this up in a cup does get a little bit messy, but that's okay. That's why I like to have a screen printing towel with me at all times to wipe off my fingers. You do want to make sure the mixture is as fully mixed as you can get it before you begin using it on your project. Then once your mixture is fully mixed, now it's time to screen print with it. So once you have your ink well mixed, now it's time to begin screen printing. So I'm going to be screen printing on this canvas bag, and it does have a little pocket here in the back. And so to make sure that I have a nice even surface, I'm going to be using this piece of wood, slipping it inside the bag to make sure that I have a nice solid surface to print on. So that's always sure to give us a more even print if we have a good area to work with. So I'm just going to position that wood kind of in the middle of my bag there. You don't want any edges or anything on top of that to make sure that it's nice and flat. So once we have the wood in the middle of the bag, next we can go ahead and line up our screen onto our bag and get it approximately where we want it. And we'll do our best, of course, to make sure that it's right in the center and nice and straight. So one trick about using my self-healing mat is I like to line things up on my self-healing mat and ensuring they're straight. And once I do that, then I feel a little bit better about putting my screen on top and making sure that it's lined up too. Because if they're both square, in theory, they should be in line. I think that's a good position on the bag. I might move it down just a little. I'm just looking at where it's gonna hit here on the bag. And once I have my screen lined up on my bag, then I'm gonna take my mixture and I'm gonna put a nice thick line at the top. Keep in mind that when you're working with the Puff Additive, you do wanna have a fairly thick amount of ink on the print itself. That way we make sure we see lots of 3D puff magic. So I'm gonna put plenty of ink and Puff Additive at the top of my screen. And we want to make sure it covers our design all the way, edge to edge. But we can always come back and add more. So I think that looks like a good start. So then I'm going to take my squeegee and I'm going to begin doing a couple passes at medium pressure. Now keep in mind when you're trying to lay a thicker layer of ink down on your print that you want to actually use less pressure to allow more ink through the screen. So I'm gonna do a couple passes and get my ink down on the bag. And then in my final passes, I'm just gonna go over it super lightly to lay down some extra ink. So we'll get a couple of passes going to ensure that we have good even coverage. And then once we finish with that, I'm gonna set my squeegee down at the bottom and add some more of that ink so that we can come in with a thicker layer. And this is why I said that the ink only does like 1 to 3 projects depending on the size of your design, everything. It doesn't go quite as far as you think it would because we want to lay down the ink nice and thick. So now I'm just going to do a couple of really light passes with my squeegee to really lay that color down nicely. I want to make sure that this bottom word has plenty of ink, so I'm going to add a little extra and then go over that one more time. Just even everything out. And then once I think everything is good, I'm going to add some of this back into my cup because I have tons of extra. And then once we get the extra ink put back in our container, next we can start actually seeing some of this 3D puff magic. So I'm gonna put my squeegee into my basket to keep it from spilling all over the place. I'm gonna set my cup aside on a towel. And then I'm just gonna set my screen aside because you do have to move very quickly while this print is still wet. You definitely don't want to take the time to clean off your screen because we need to move quickly while this is still wet. And actually, I see a little area right here on my Y where it looks a little bit messed up. So I'm gonna take the time to fix it with a paintbrush, and then we will heat set it with ink. So to fix up this Y, I'm just gonna take some ink and kind of paint it in with my paintbrush. And once I fix things up with the paintbrush, then we are all set. Since we're gonna be using high heat on this project from our heat gun to heat set it, I am gonna place my Cricut Easy Press mat underneath my bag to make sure that my table doesn't get damaged from all the heat. Just be super careful while you do this not to mess up your project, because I definitely made that mistake while I was experimenting. All right, so now we're just gonna use that heat gun. We're gonna be moving it all the way over the design, but this does take a couple of minutes to dry. So if you're not seeing instant puff magic, don't worry. You might have to be patient and do a few passes with your heat gun before you see any 3D puff. So I'm gonna place my heat gun on low and get started with heat setting. And once you're finished heat setting your ink using your heat gun, then your project is all finished. Oh my gosh, you guys, I just feel like the puff additive adds so much to this tote bag. I am absolutely obsessed with that 3D puff effect, and I know you guys are gonna be too. So I'll go ahead and link the puff additive down in the description below so that you can check it out yourself. Now that I've done several projects using the puff additive when I was testing this out for you guys, let me give you some pro tips that I've picked up along the way. Since you have to set your screen aside while you're heat setting your ink, the ink's gonna dry on your screen and it's gonna be a bit harder to remove than usual. So I recommend using Speed Clean to remove all the ink from your screen super easily. Second, make sure that you always heat set this product using a heat gun, not a heat press like you traditionally would with screen printing ink. Another thing I've learned with Puff Additive is to do your projects in small batches. Once you set your screen aside to begin heat setting your ink, I don't recommend that you do any more projects with that specific screen. And that's because the ink is gonna get pretty dry on your screen. And so if you try to do more projects, you're not gonna get enough ink through the screen, and it's just usually not gonna go well. So work in small batches, and as soon as you set it aside, commit to washing off that screen. Another tip for success is to make sure that you use fairly thick coats of ink on your screen printing projects when you want to see that puff additive effect. Because usually the more ink that you have on your print, the thicker and the bigger the 3D puff effect will be. When it comes to maintenance on your puff additive projects, I do not recommend washing anything that you use puff additive on. Since we are heat setting using a heat gun and not a heat press, I just found that my test projects did not hold up very well in the washing machine. So I recommend using puff additive on projects that you're not planning on washing, such as tote bags, hats, or even things like can coolers. If you can't wait to get your hands on some puff additive, then drop an emoji down in the comments below. I'll be sure to link the puff additive as well as all the rest of my screen printing supplies down in the YouTube video description, so go check it out so that you can try this project yourself. If you learned something in this video, be sure to give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the DIY Alex YouTube channel for more videos a lot like this one every single Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. If we're not already connected on social media, then I would love to get to know you, so please be sure to follow me at DIY Alex Vanover on all your favorite social media platforms. All the hearts.